continue until you badly want to quit, and then continue a while longer.
Started 10 businesses, 8 failed.
I'm more concerned with winning than with making money in the short term. I don't know how it's possible to run a high-performing, small, profitable business without EOS.
All right, guys, welcome back to Built in America. We have Grant Hensel here. I have the unfair advantage to know Grant very intimately. He's a entrepreneur, a business acquisition entrepreneur to be specific. And I'm excited to have you on the pod today, Grant.
Thanks for having me, Sam. I love it.
Grant, I want to know a little bit about your background. As before you got into building entrepreneurial capital, you have started several companies. You have an awesome wife who supports you throughout this journey as well. Tell us a little about who Grant is and how it all got started.
I've wanted to be an entrepreneur since I was 12, which is when I learned what the concept of being an entrepreneur was, and immediately just thought that is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And that's never changed. I went through many failures in that journey. I've started businesses 10 times. 2 got acquired in small transactions. 7 totally failed one way or another. And 1 has done well, called Nonprofit Megaphone, which does digital marketing for nonprofits. And then basically that journey made me realize, it's potentially better to buy existing businesses than build new ones from scratch.
Let me double down on that. So started 10 businesses, 8 failed. Why did the 8 fail? Walk us through that.
So 7, fortunately 7 failed, but all kinds of reasons. One of the things that I realized is that I am uniquely bad at like tech startup type things. We tried to start a business that was very similar to what ultimately became Udemy and like an online course marketplace. And I'm just bad at that. I'm decent at businesses that provide a service and just are intended to make money. But that took me like multiple iterations to realize was the case.
How do you know when to abandon a business? So when you start 7 failed businesses and you want to continue to make sure you're giving it your all, like you left it all on the table. But then at some point you have to say, I'm going to throw this in the trash. How does one bifurcate one versus the other?
Yeah, I think that the painful answer for this for me is that no business that I've ever failed has succeeded, obviously, that I've abandoned has succeeded. But no business that has succeeded has ever succeeded before the point at which I badly wanted to quit. It's always been shortly after the point at which I badly wanted to quit and then continued. And then it actually started working. And so that is now my sort of rule of thumb is like continue until you badly want to quit and then continue a while longer. And then if it's still not going well, okay, it's probably time to throw in the towel, sadly.
And let's go and continue the journey on how the business that you built today, Nonprofit Megaphone, has been quite successful. It runs without you. I know you have 60 plus employees, and now you're able to start a new fund that allows search funders to go out there and buy businesses, and you're their backer. So talking about Nonprofit Megaphones, then we'll dive into entrepreneurial capital.
Yeah, Nonprofit Megaphone started 9 years ago. It provides digital marketing services for nonprofits and helps them with a thing called the Google Ad Grant. Serves almost 800 clients, great team, and especially great leadership team. I am no longer the CEO. I'm in EOS terminology, if people are familiar with that. I'm just the visionary. And so involved at a strategic level, but I have no operational involvement because frankly, everyone on the team is so much better at the operations than I am that everyone wins by me not being involved operationally. And then that has provided the opportunity to do now entrepreneurial capital, which has strategic benefits both for like Nonprofit Megaphone and also just for the wider universe of investing in people who are doing self-funded search transactions where they're going out and buying small, profitable, boring businesses.
Before I dive into entrepreneurial capital, I want to double down on something that you just said right there. You now are the visionary of a decent sized business that is basically a paid media business, right? And you've hired yourself out completely. You have a great team behind you. You know, as a CEO, I think one of the biggest premises around that is knowing how to hire great talent and lead people. You've been able to go do that and then remove yourself from the operations. What do you think your skill set allowed you to do in order to get to that massive level of scale to remove yourself from the day-to-day operation?
2 things. 1, EOS is enormously helpful. There's a great book called Traction, which I learned about in college by writing letters to people on the Inc. 500 list who were fastest growing private companies. Met with a bunch of them and I was like, how did you do it? And 7 of the 10 that I met with said, it's this book Traction and this system called EOS. You should totally do it. And so anyway, we have done it. And that would not be possible nothing we've done would be possible without that. And then the second thing is that I think that I have a strong desire not to be the smartest person in the room. I have a strong desire to have like a leadership team that is so much better at their areas than I ever could be, just because they're wired differently and they're smarter in different ways than I am. And that makes it simple, because as you increasingly figure out that, this person would be much better at Grant than that, let's have that person do it instead of Grant.
And if you're hiring me today as your CEO of nonprofit Megaphones, what's the first question you'd ask me? Obviously, maybe I have the skill sets to run an agency, but what's one underlying fundamental thing that you are very keen on knowing that I am the right fit for that role?
I wouldn't hire someone cold. Like we've never hired someone from the outside into our leadership team, or into like almost any leadership position, and that has worked very well, because it's just so tricky. Like the difference between someone in an interview and someone that you've worked with for 2 years, I think it is almost impossible to truly get to know someone through an interview process, and we'd want to have an extended period of time with them, which interestingly is why we like the self-funded search model, by the way. But anyway, we can talk about that later. So my answer is sadly no answer. I don't have any secret question that would make it work.
Yeah, I think you resonate with my biggest fear is I hire based off trust. And I had a CEO coach named Ryan Blair who I just sat with the other day, and he's like, Sam, you should always hire on trust. And I'm like, well, what's the best litmus test to do so? He goes, literally ask them, hey, can I trust you? And see how they react. Right away, you're going to see hand gestures. You're going to see their eyes shift. You can see their movements on how they react to the question, right? And you'll know instantaneously if you can trust someone, because I have this thesis that I always say that hire a 10 out of 10 trust, and then on an odometer scale. And if their skill set is an 8 out of 10 or even a 7 out of 10, you can get them to a 9 out of 10 over time, right? I think you and I have talked about that in depth in our core group as well. And I think that has always served me well. So I think the same thing resonates with you. And now you've transferred that skill set into finding really good entrepreneurs, or self-funded searchers, I should call it. And I want you to define what a self-funded search is for the audience before I dive into entrepreneurial capital.
So self-funded searcher is someone who says, I would really like to buy and own and operate a small profitable business. And then they go out into the world by themselves and they try and find a business owner that's willing to sell to them, typically because they're retiring. It often takes a year to 2 years. They're not getting paid. They're just doing this at night and on the weekends while they have a real job most of the time. They get a business owner willing to sell to them. They negotiate a letter of intent or an LOI. They raise money. They get debt to buy the business. And then they close the deal and run the business as the new CEO.
Okay, Grant.
Incredible.
It's incredible, right? But I want to poke holes into this too. And I want to challenge you on this. I just graduated from Wharton. I'm an analyst at a PE firm. I've been financial modeling for the last 3 years. And I really want to go get out of this hamster run wheel of working at XYZ private equity firm. And I find Grant, because his tweets and his LinkedIn posts go so viral. And I want to just get in touch with Grant and say, I want to go buy a business, but I have zero operational experience. How do you trust me?
It's an uphill battle for sure. The thing that we like about the self-funded search model is that if a pre-LOI searcher, which is what the analyst would be at that point, comes to us, our desire is to be helpful to them and supportive to them, because they will have to go and find a business to buy, which is enormously hard. Like the majority of searchers that try and find a business do not find one. And so that's sort of the first screening. We'll be helpful to you, but no money is being invested until you've actually found a potential transaction that you've negotiated, which is extremely hard. And the vast majority of the Wharton analysts quit during that journey. Like they do not make it, just statistically, because they're not going to be able to convince a business owner to sell to them, because the business owner is going to ask the same questions that you are. Like, you've never operated a fruit stand. Why would I sell my child to you?
So this is funny. I have the complete opposite problem. I have a disproportionate amount of M&A in my pipeline right now, and I need to go fill that with the right capital of what I'm doing today. So, if anybody wants some tips on how to get owners to sell, I think Grant and I can help you. But I want to double down more on entrepreneurial capital. So, okay, I go and find a good business and I finally get an owner to sell to me. Okay, he agrees to sell. I buy a company. I'm ready to buy a company under LOI. It has $1 million of EBITDA and it's a $5 million purchase price, a 5 times multiple. I bring that to you, Grant. I'm like, that's a little rich. I don't know if I can LBO that. LBO means a levered buyout. And talk to me what your parameters are. If I'm a self-funded searcher, what you're willing to invest on. What are the terms? What kind of EBITDA multiple should I be looking for, and so forth?
Our sweet spot is businesses doing more than 750 grand of EBITDA. So in this case, that would qualify for being acquired for 3 to 5 times multiple. So we would say, just like you said, this is a little high. Like, this better be the best business on the face of the earth if it's being bought for a 5x multiple. Or maybe there's interesting deal structuring where, like, $1 million of that is an earnout or something creative. But 3 to 5 times multiple. And then we have 4 qualitative characteristics, which are low customer concentration, low CapEx, low cyclicality, and a history of profitability. And we can talk about those if you want, but it's basically a business that has decent amounts of resilience against some single point of failure. Like, a big customer can't leave and kill you. We can't have a recession and then suddenly no one wants what you're selling. You can't have massive capital needs where an expensive piece of equipment could break down and then you now are underwater, or you have to constantly reinvest and so forth.
I see a lot of searchers and independent sponsors. I also invest in some of these deals myself. And they're saying, Sam, this business has, $950,000 of EBITDA. And then, I go back and look at the numbers and there's maybe $200,000 of free cash flow on that. Right. And I looked at that and I'm like, there's inherent risk on that. How do you view that today?
I hate the term EBITDA. We would say distributable pre-tax earnings is the thing that we actually think about. And so if you're a marketing agency, EBITDA and distributable pre-tax earnings are probably exactly the same. But if you're like a bulldozer manufacturer, they're not. And that makes a difference.
What are some businesses that you hate? What are some businesses that you love?
I hate retail. I hate e-commerce with a blazing passion. I think it's horrible. I have lots of friends that are quite successful in e-commerce, but it is highly ad dependent often. And if your Facebook ads stop working, you're dead. It's highly capital intensive because you have to fund the inventory, and it's just wickedly competitive. So I hate e-commerce. Things that we like, we're looking at a business right now that does in-home nursing in an affluent community, and 100% cash pay on their clients. Very long-term nurse retention because they just pay significantly more than the market average because they're serving such high-end clients. Business has been around for decades and has never had a website, but it's just grown beautifully through referrals. And so that is a perfect example of the type of opportunity that we love.
Great. I know you've invested prior to Entrepreneurial Capital. You've invested in several searchers as well. Can you share some stories, whether they're good or the bad, and be super transparent throughout this process? Because I think the listeners would really want to know what buying a business is all about. I think there's a lot of horse shit on the internet today on acquiring business, how easy it is. As someone who does it on a day-to-day basis, I'm under contract on 3 companies today, and I've bought several companies in my past. This is the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life. And I built my last company around brain and spine surgery, manufacturing implants and instruments around that. And I thought brain and spine surgery was hard, but this is way harder. There's operational chaos. There's a lot of financial literacy and engineering around all these that you have to get right. And it's so easy to get wrong, right? And I think there's a lot of naivety out there of people saying, oh, wow, I see XYZ influencer talking about buying a business and it looks so easy and I have a 9-to-5 job. I can do it on the side, get an SBA loan, talk to Grant, get the equity, close the deal, right? But we all know it's not like that, Graham. So share some stories on maybe some good experiences. And if you have any bad ones as well, I'd love to hear that.
It is so much harder than people realize. It is only, we spend a lot of time talking to people that are considering being a searcher. And I would say if you're considering being a searcher and you do not feel a burning desire within your soul that will not be quenched unless you own and operate a business, this is probably not the right path because it's brutally painful. And you are very likely to give up along the way if you don't deeply, deeply, deeply want to do this despite significant pain. So with that caveat aside, it is, as you said, extremely hard and it takes forever. Like the business, so my wife and I bought a business ourselves, so I can speak to our own experience. It took us 9 months to search, which is blisteringly fast, much faster than the average. We just got lucky. Even given that, we went to LOI 4 times. So 1 wasn't accepted and 3 were accepted. 2 fell through. And that is also very normal. It's not going to be the first business that you get under contract with. It's just every single thing is going to be a process. And then once you buy, you're like, no, the marathon has just started. And now typically what happens is there's a J curve where the first year is the hardest year of operations because 1, the seller probably sold at a little bit of a local maximum by definition. They're not going to sell in their worst year most of the time. 2, the business was a little bit distracted by the sales process. And now it's time to
Very
operate
good
again.
point.
And there's going to be a little drop off. So anyway, it's just brutally hard at every step of the journey. The rewards are great if you make it through, but it is not a cakewalk as some influencers would suggest.
And have you had any tough experiences that you're willing to share? Maybe some of the searchers you've invested thus far, or is it too early in the cycle?
It's still fairly early, but there's been all kinds of people having all kinds of J-curve-esque experiences. So we invested in a searcher who actually bought a wonderful business, but had significant team turnover that was needed, especially on the sales team at the beginning. They had no sales quotas, no sales tracking. They basically just had salespeople and they said, get out there and sell. And not that much was being sold as a result of that. So they had to do pretty meaningful team upgrading and replacement, which is always just painful. And they had some people on their operations team, a similar thing. And you go in hoping, that it's all going to be fine. And I think he had basically met the majority of the team pre-close. But then after, getting under the hood, realized there's some major problems there. And they had to do a lot of personnel changes, which is painful, but for the better.
Oh, I've been there, man. I've gone into these companies and just seen the worst of the worst, and owners steal from us, employees using trucks that aren't theirs, just things that you would never even imagine. I've seen at this point. And that's where I feel like when people are trying to do an escape velocity of acquisitions, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, but it sounds really fun and dandy to go buy EBITDA and buy revenue today to get to 50 or $75 million of top line in 12 months. And look, I'm a victim of that, right? This is what I do on a day-to-day basis. But there's also an organic approach and there's an inorganic approach to growth. How do you help self-funded searchers grow these businesses? Are you completely passive? Do you bring on your agency in any capacity? Do you sit on board meetings and quarterly calls? What does Grant do to enhance these operations?
We serve as advisors and we try and be helpful at a personal level. So practically, we have, gone through all kinds of pain and suffering of growing nonprofit Megaphone, growing the business my wife bought. And so my goal is, and my job is to be helpful to the searcher post-close, much more so than, we'll be helpful pre-close, but our desire is to be even more helpful post-close as an advisory board member. We don't want to micromanage people because people are doing this because they want to be their own boss, which we think is awesome, but we want to be a cheerleader and a support person in that. We have recommendations. So we say we would highly recommend you implement EOS. It is fantastic. It will change your life. Please do it. Not everyone has to do that, but we highly recommend it. And then we make recommendations also of other partners. We don't require them to use services of anyone, of anything that we have or anyone else has. But if they need something, we're thrilled to make recs.
When you recommend EOS, are you asking them to actually come out to the company and implement the system with the people in place, or just read the book and then take notes and implement it?
Yeah, we're asking them to hire an implementer, like an official EOS implementer person, which is typically like 30 grand a year, and do it for real. That's what Nonprofit Megaphone basically was growing beautifully, and until we hit about $2.5 million of revenue, and then everything fell apart. And the reason was because we had sort of half-heartedly self-implemented EOS. We hired an EOS implementer, got us all straightened out, and then it's been a beautiful growth story from there. So I don't know how it's possible to run a high-performing business without a high-performing small profitable business without EOS. So we strongly recommend it.
Let's talk about Entrepreneurial Capital, how it got started. You have raised, I believe, $9.6 million as of July 1st, 2025. Am I right?
9.7 now, but yes.
Changes by the hour. 9.7 million, and you have $300,000 left to go for that major number 10. And maybe that was one of your first conversations when you started this idea of how you go raise 10 million bucks. Hopefully some of my advice came to the creme, and it looks like you've done quite well. Tell me about the capital raising process on raising $9.7 million from strangers for the most part. There's a lot of people who don't know you who gave you money to go back this venture. What does that say about you? And how was that capital raising process thus far?
It was so much more fun than I expected. I had sort of pondered this notion of raising money because I've been investing in self-funded searchers, doing a lot of diligence and cultivating deal flow. And it seemed like, okay, we're sort of creating a public good here of good diligence deals to invest in. And I wanted to do it with more intensity. Like I wanted to have a team and, do this with lots of people devoting their full-time efforts to it. And so I was encouraged by a number of people, some mentors I had, and you, Sam, as well, who were basically like, because I didn't believe I could do it, to be honest. I was like, I don't know. I've had a cool entrepreneurial journey, but I don't know if people would, I don't know if I could raise money. I don't know how that works. I don't know what that means. And you and a number of others were like, oh, you can totally do it. It'll be great. Don't worry about it. And that was right. Interestingly, that was right. Yeah, just honored to have lots of people that I do know and then lots of people that I don't know invest in the fund. They believed in the asset class. They believed in me. Some of the advice that you gave, Sam, specifically about just like you should post on LinkedIn, you should do a webinar, was transformational. We did a webinar as a result of your encouragement. I posted as like, we're doing a webinar, and I think like 50 people signed up or something. And I was like, Sam, 50 people have signed up. And you're like,
What did I say?
Rookie numbers. You said, yeah, rookie numbers. Like, you should be posting about this every day until the webinar. You should be able to get to 200. And we did. We got to 200. We did a webinar, and we raised probably like $3.5–4 million from that webinar. And the conversations that followed it. So anyway, I owe a huge debt of gratitude to you for all the help on this journey.
Well, I appreciate that gesture and that comment. So I think, Grant, you build a lot of trust in the way you communicate and speak. You're one of the only guys who works from home and wears a dress shirt every single day. I think that goes a long way, right? To know how serious you are in your venture. So $9.6 million, $9.7 million. How many investors is that today?
It's like 55, something like that.
What's the largest check and what's the smallest check today?
So I am $1 million GP commit, and then second, tied for largest, is another $1 million, and then minimum is 100.
Walk me through that second $1 million check. You don't mention the name at all, but how did you get someone to give you $1 million in a new fund that you have experience, but this is gonna be your first fund, which is your first fund is always your hardest, because if you do this correctly, fund number 2, you're going to get to $50 or $100 million very quickly. Tell me about that investor.
Yeah, so it's a father-son team, and the son I'd gotten to know in a couple instances over the last number of years, and sort of loosely been in touch, but not super closely in touch. And what was interesting to me is that basically 100% of the investors that ended up participating in the fund are people who were already familiar with the entrepreneurship through acquisition model and liked it and thought like, oh, this is great. I'd like to have some passive exposure to this asset class. And that was true for him. And he's just, it's so, I mean, just to, there's the joke that's like, if you're selling something for $50,000, person just says like, so here's the wire, like, here you go. And if you're selling something for $5, it's like, you have to tell them your life story. And it's like it was 100% the case in this. They were our easiest LP, they're quickest through the paperwork, the most joy to just interact with. And some of the smaller ones were more involved, and that is totally fine. But anyway, it's just funny. There's something about people who've had enormous amounts of success are just highly decisive, know what they want, and it's not a long decision process.
Solve rich people problems, what they say, right?
Totally.
And I'm very big on that, in the sense of like, when you go build a business today, I always gauge on who the customer base is going to be. So if you're heavily D2C related versus B2B related, two vastly different customer bases that will cause you different headaches, right? I'd rather have a headache on a $6 million PO from Kaiser Permanente than a small doctor's office who wants to place an order for $400. And I know that sounds obvious, but you can do a few orders for $6 million, or you can do thousands of orders for a couple $100, right? And your customer ticket form will be pretty extenuous on a couple $100 orders over and over again from these small doctor's offices. And I've been there, done that, and I've seen that happen, when building my last company, a medical device business. And I think it goes the same facet of here in raising capital is, go to people who believe in you first and foremost, have been in your shoes and willing to write larger checks. And that's easier said than done. I totally get that, but they're out there. I think people underestimate how much capital is really out there today to go deploy in a venture. Now, some of the business that you're investing today from Entrepreneurial Capital, walk us through some of the searchers, if you can, on what they're pursuing and some of the first deals you may be able to go do.
Yeah. So we did our initial close a couple of weeks ago. And so now full bore into searcher conversations. The in-home nursing deal that mentioned is one that we're very excited about and is in the process, and should hopefully, as long as diligence continues to go well, should be a potential first investment. We're looking at some other interesting. It's just interesting how much deal flow there is out there if you are public about wanting to invest in it. So we heard over the weekend, from actually someone who knew one of my brothers in college who is potentially going to be buying a very interesting business that his aunt actually owns, but who his aunt's got lots of offers from private equity, doesn't want to sell to private equity, wants to stay in the family, and is basically considering selling it to them at very reasonable sort of like friends and family terms. It's been a business that's been around for almost 3 decades, like $4.5 million of EBITDA for $20 million valuation. Anyway, just has lots of attractive attributes to it. And so it's just been fascinating. There's so much more deal flow than we even thought. And I saw a lot before we were even public about the fund, but now that we are public about it, it's just been remarkable. So
you think deal flow comes mainly from searchfunder.com, LinkedIn, all sorts of areas?
All over the place. We have a full-time team, multiple people of which are basically responsible for cultivating searcher relationships, and that helps a lot. LinkedIn helps a lot. SearchFunder helps a lot. Just being public helps a lot. And then word sort of spreads. Because we looked at basically 6 solid deals last week, a number of which came from just random referrals of people that, we knew they're like a service provider that they were working with, or we knew another searcher that they had talked to. And so word gets around. It's an interesting, very small world in the ETA universe.
Tell me about the team today at Entrepreneurial Capital. I know your wife's involved, and we'll get into that a little bit. I believe you hired a chief of staff. I want to know the rest of the people on your team.
Yeah. So my wife actually she's not really involved in Entrepreneurial Capital. She runs the business that we acquired through self-funded search called Lexigate, and is highly self-sufficient and is wonderful. The team for Entrepreneurial Capital is myself. We have a chief of staff named Peter, who's fantastic. We have a diligence analyst named Clark, and we have a business development and partnerships person named Anna. And that group of 4 is sort of the core, like, compensated team. And then we have a universe of advisors, most of whom are LPs in the fund, and some of whom are just mentors that I've had for a long time, who we basically, every time that we look at a deal and it passes our initial sets of screening, we share it then with our advisors. And if it passes that, we actually share it with all of our LPs, not for a vote, but just because we want to hear people's perspectives if they have them. And basically, interestingly, almost all of our LPs said, I'd love to invest in this, and I want to learn from the process of how you look at opportunities. So we said, great, you have to, you'll be bound to confidentiality, but we're thrilled to share. Not as a vote, it's not a democracy, but we would love to hear your perspectives, because basically all of our investors are business owners or people that have thought a lot about search or are considering a search themselves. So we're actually excited to hear what they have to say.
And Grant, if I were to invest in the fund today, or another person listening on this podcast would want to invest in Entrepreneurial Capital, walk us through how that would look like.
So basically, people make a commitment. They make a capital commitment, which has to be at least $100,000 or more. And they then sign paperwork. We have basically 1 slide that explains the investor terms, which is like a 200-page document when you spec that out into all the legalese. So you review and sign the subscription agreement. We do KYC checks, like know your customer checks, to make sure that you're not secretly some sort of mafia organization. And then, crucial, which has not happened yet, but got to be safe. And then there are capital calls. And so if someone makes a $100,000 commitment, they're not investing all $100,000 right at the beginning. It's probably like 15% as initial capital call, and then call it 8% a quarter for the next 2 to 3 years. And that's how it rolls. We do updates. We share the deal flow that we're looking at for people's thoughts. We give quarterly updates, and we roll from there. So it's a fairly straightforward process.
Are you able to share what the waterfall looks like? So if an investor is interested in learning how to get the economic return, what that would be?
Yeah. So despite advice to the contrary, we are a small fund. $10 million is very small. Most of the time, if you're a small fund, you're going to do sort of interesting, creative deal terms to make it more attractive to the GP, which is myself. In this case, we did not do that. We were just using plain vanilla, straight up the middle fund terms. So 2% management fee, 20% carry after an 8% hurdle rate on what's called a European waterfall. So if someone invests $100, they have to get all $100 of their money back, plus 8% a year compounded, and then the 20% carry kicks in. And so if you're doing the math, you think like, they have a team, there's no way that they're making money on the management fee. And that is correct. We're not making any money on the management fee, sadly. But we are incentivized for the long term. And yeah, I'm more concerned with winning than with making money in the short term. So here we are.
And Grant, how long are you going to hold this fund for? So, for investors that want to invest in this company today, or in this fund, I should say, is this typical a 5-year hold?
10-year fund life, and we'd assume a 5 to 7 year average hold for the individual investments that we make. So we have a 3-year investment period. We're trying to basically look at 100 plus deals a year and pick our favorite 5 each year for the next roughly 3 years, maybe 2.5, but roughly 3, and then hold each of those for 5 to 7 years. We believe that in this asset class, having a longer hold period makes a lot more sense. So this is not like traditional private equity sort of turn and burn approach. We think there's a lot of value in the long term.
And do you distribute cash to your investors during this fund?
Yes. So the way that the fund or the investor economics work, if we go back to your example of searchers buying a business that does $1 million of earnings, and let's just say it's a 4 times multiple to make the math easier. Sure. So $4 million, they're probably getting an SBA loan for $3 million of that. And they're probably getting like 10% seller financing. So call it $400,000, which leaves $600,000 left as equity. The searcher is probably putting in $100,000 of their own money, ballpark. And then maybe someone like us is doing $500,000. The way that the terms work is that the searcher takes a salary, but the salary is capped. So the searcher has to make all of their real money through distributions, which is good because that's how we also make our own money. And the way that it works is that all distributions first have to go to paying a 10% a year preferred return on our $500,000 of investor capital, and then returning our $500,000 of investor capital, at which point there's then a split. And it would probably be like roughly 25. In this case, if you have a 2-time step up, which we can talk about if we want, but ignoring that for a second, it would probably end up being the searcher owns 75% of the business and investors own 25%. So basically, we get 10% a year preferred return until our $500,000 is returned, and then 25% of distributions. And all of those cash flows as they happen just flow into the fund and then flow out to our investors each quarter as they happen.
And I have pretty good insight on how you manage all this, but if I'm just a listener, and like, how is Grant and his 3 people on his team managing all these deals, how the money flows, how his investor money flows? What platforms do you use? How do you manage all this in the back end?
We have lots of platform recommendations. So we use Pass-Through for our LP onboarding, which I highly recommend. It's fantastic. We use a tool called Veravend for capital calls, which is great and just makes it so much easier for both capital calls and then distributions to LPs. And then we use a group called Vector for our fund admin, which means they're doing like the accounting and sort of financial oversight of the fund operations, which has been super helpful. So there are, and we have a great law firm as well that helped with all the subscription documents called the Investments Lawyers, who are fantastic. So each of those came highly recommended and were absolutely fantastic.
And Grant, as you're rounding out your $10 million fund today, a lot of people, once they close their first fund, a lot of PE firms are raising their second fund. Is that something that you see doing instantaneously as well?
We would want, so our desire is to have fund 1, knock it out of the park, and then do fund 2 once fund 1 has been basically fully deployed. So our sort of timeline for a fund 2 would be like 2.5 years from now, 3 years from now or so, once fund 1 is deployed.
And what are some interesting sectors of business that you want searchers to potentially focus on that you could add a lot of value? There's like an ever-changing growth in a couple different sectors that I see today. I'm obviously in the paving sector. There's a little bit more CapEx than that. People like line striping. People like the restoration business today. We all know that HVAC and plumbing is always hot, but the multiples are very inflated. If you were to pick 2 or 3 more industries that you would want to go deploy a large amount of your fund into, what would that be?
I like businesses that are B2B services, but are highly specialized and resilient. So like we invested personally in a business that helps schools with E-Rate consulting, which is a federal program that provides money for their IT infrastructure build-outs within schools. Like that is highly niche B2B services. They have long-term contracts and a degree of predictability that we really like. We love stuff like that. I have a background in B2B services, so I just like it a lot. I also am a big fan of sort of more trade, blue collar type businesses where the searcher has direct experience in that universe and is not coming from a PE fund or some sort of fancy consulting. We're investing in a deal which is roofing in Florida, and the searcher who is going to be operating the business is previously sort of like a number two in command for an exterior remodeling business. And it's like, that's perfect. That's fantastic. We think that adds like a really unique value that a consultant or a fresh MBA does not add. So we love those types of things, among many other things. We're quite open to all kinds of industries.
Great. Talk to me about your wife a little bit. You look online, you see Alex Hormozi, Layla Hormozi building a massive conglomerate called acquisition.com. Maybe you guys are on the same pathway to get there as well. You guys work together hand in hand. It's awesome to have a wife that you can go build with, suffer with at the same time too. And you guys acquired your last business, which is a personal injury agency that is doing quite well. I know you guys bought that for a great multiple as well. And she's off to the races running that. Walk me through your partnership with your wife and how you guys have developed such a unique relationship to be in a marriage, but also work together in a similar capacity.
We met in college as part of starting like an entrepreneurship club at the college that we went to. And so, in some ways the rest is history, but we both just really love business, and we're business nerds. We like building things. We like improving structures and operations and processes. And so it's a lot of fun. We talk about it all the time, for better or for worse. And it's nice having separate spheres of influence. Like Julia runs Lexigate, her business. I do not run Lexigate. She doesn't need me. She does her own thing. But we talk about it. And I run Entrepreneurial Capital. But we talk about everything, and we're able to give perspective and thoughts to each other. And so it's just been a nice, I think if we were working directly in the same business, at least right now, it'd maybe be a little bit too much, but having our own spheres and being able to talk about and sort of bounce ideas off each other for everything has been such a joy. And we're just really similar. We're two people that like actually just genuinely love business stuff. And so what else would we talk about?
So dinner table, it's all about business.
Yeah. Vacation is like a great business brainstorming time. It's like, it never stops. Yeah. But it's fun.
Grant, where do you feel your zone of genius is today?
I think that I am good at at noticing and initiating the implementation of things that will drive disproportionate impact for businesses and especially for leaders. Like, I think I'm a better support to CEOs than a CEO myself, which is thus the whole Entrepreneurial Capital venture. And thus why I'm no longer the CEO of nonprofit Megaphone, and an incredible member of our leadership team is, and why Julia is the CEO of Lexigate and I'm not. I think that I'm not that old. I'm 32, but I have seen a decent amount in the last many years of trying and failing to be an entrepreneur, and then ultimately actually making it happen. And I like being helpful to people who are highly competent, highly motivated, highly skilled, and just trying to get a little bit better every day.
As you talked about, you're a young 32-year-old who doesn't like being a CEO anymore. You're more of a visionary and you like to be a support of a CEO instead at the board level. Can you define a really good CEO for me today?
I would break it down into EOS terms of like visionary versus integrator. So if I was defining a really good integrator, which I think most good operational CEOs are integrators, I'd say it's someone who has an incredible ability to understand the different parts of the organization and how they relate together, and how to sort of tie break between them and understand like when one part needs to be more focused on than the other part, and how if you break something over here, it'll have massive impacts down the road. Someone who has a remarkable ability to let nothing slip through the cracks ever, and a person who is both good at the people side and the process side of business, which is an extremely rare combination that like our CEO at Nonprofit Megaphone totally has, and it is unbelievable what you can accomplish when you have both those things. And you're just highly thoughtful, highly structured, highly disciplined, and you never stop. And it's just like you win eventually. You win one way or another.
Give us a good example of who that CEO would be.
In terms of
that dream outcome. Tell me a CEO today that you are admirable of with those characteristics and traits.
Yeah. So, like Amber, the CEO of Nonprofit Megaphone, has all of those things. And so funny story about her. She was one of our first full-time employees at nonprofit Megaphone. Her previous career was in being a professor of piano at a college and doing canine massage therapy for dogs. So nothing even vaguely related to business. But we had a wonderful interview. She'd built her own sort of like piano tutoring business, was clearly extremely hardworking. And she's just over the last like 8 years of being at nonprofit Megaphone has just reinvented herself probably 3 distinct times or more. As she's had new levels of responsibility, she's kept getting promoted and now is the CEO of the 60-person organization and is just like an absolute killer in the best possible way. She just does not stop. Our sales marketing team was struggling. We were having just like difficulty hitting the goals. And we said like, Amber, can you fix it? And over a period of 6 months, deeply working with everyone on the sales marketing team. Like this is a total team effort, but it just turned around. She has an ability to enter situations and then they turn around, and it's very cool to watch.
Grant, you have a deep desire, and you're enamored by Warren Buffett and his shareholder letters, his meetings in Nebraska and Omaha. I know you've written letters to Warren Buffett almost every year as well, and you read his letters every single year. Talk to me about what Buffett has done for you to shape you who you are today.
I am such a fan, of the annual shareholder letters. I think that a couple things. One, Warren Buffett's long-term mindset and focus on assets that compound over the long term, of which the foremost is reputation, I think is deeply insightful and deeply meaningful. And he has lines about how, reputations are built over decades and destroyed in minutes or destroyed in seconds. And I just think that that's really true. I also think that he has a remarkable ability he's doing what I want to do and what I'm trying to do, of just find people who are extremely good at operating and be supportive to them, but don't micromanage them. Don't be constantly looking over their shoulder, but just put the right incentive structures in place and be supportive and let it roll. And that's why, interestingly, that's why we're doing a fund that invests in self-funded searchers as opposed to a holding company that would be like fully in control and could fire, is hiring like basically an employee as the CEO. We think that there should be deep incentive alignment and deep commitment on the part of the operator, which we like that the self-funded search model has, that like the holdco model traditionally doesn't have. And we've gotten that from Warren Buffett, even though he is a holding company. But the ways that he's implementing that, we think are actually, for us in the small business world, closer to self-funded search. So anyway, I'm a huge Warren Buffett.
Yeah, likewise. I think there's a lot of people who are big fans of Warren Buffett, trying to build these holding companies today. I think I can go in a whole hour podcast on whether it works or doesn't work for certain people. I think they don't realize that the companies that he obviously buys have massive scale to them, rather than buying, $1 million HVAC businesses and trying to manage 8 different entities that aren't correlated to one another. So that's where just people have to be somewhat mindful of that. But I think you have a really good head on your shoulders, Grant. I think you're going in the right direction. And I think people would be honored to invest with you today. If people want to learn more about you and Entrepreneurial Capital, where can they find more about you?
Entrepreneurialcapital.com is a great resource. I'm on LinkedIn, just Grant Hensel, and Twitter/X @Grant Hensel. But yeah, happy to be helpful however I can be.
Grant, that's the pod. Thanks, brother.